Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the ITSAN video podcast. We are with Kelly Barta today. We're really excited to talk to her about her new book that's available. Yay! It's amazing. And it's available on Amazon and it's available on Kindle. And I'm just going to give you guys an introduction about Kelly. And so Kelly went through TSW, so she experienced this health crisis. She had an adverse reaction to the steroid she was using. She was propelled into the world of advocacy. Her advocacy efforts have led her to serve on several national dermatology nonprofits, bringing awareness to the great needs of the eczema and the TSW community and supporting those living with these conditions. Kelly is still on the board, the executive board for ITSAN. She is the past president of ITSAN. She also serves as the president of the Coalition of Skin Diseases. And she has presented to the FDA as well as before patient, medical, academic, and political audiences. So what an amazing career you've had, and it's amazing to talk to you today. So I'm excited to talk about the book.
Me too. Thank you, Natalie. Thanks so much for doing this.
Absolutely. I'm excited to do it. All right. So for people who haven't read the book, I'm sure you'll want to read it after this, but the book is in two parts. And the first part kind of covers your life with eczema and how it led you to your TSW experience. So let's start there. Let's start with talking about eczema. There's so many good tidbits in there about root causes and statistics. So can you just tell us, I know in the beginning you really started diving deep into trying to figure out, how you got into that position. So can you tell us a little bit about when you first started studying the causes of eczema and what you found out about the drugs you were using?
Yeah, and I want to just take a step back first too and say how this book came about and why then I added eczema. So I started TSW in 2012. It totally hit me out of the blue. I had no idea what TSW was, that it existed, what it meant, what my life would look like. But when I was bedridden for about a year and a half, I realized, this story has to be told. I was looking around and couldn't find any books. I couldn't find many resources outside of ITSAN and just felt like, wow, this is such a life-changing issue. It's so horrific. It has to be addressed. So I started writing and then realized when I picked it back up this year or last year now, the whole story needs to be told, not just TSW. We need to know how people are getting here and how we can prevent this in the first place, and realize this book isn't just for the TSW crowd, it's for the whole eczema community and really even beyond that, right? To healthcare providers and regulators, policymakers, everybody needs to hear this story. So I wanted to paint the whole picture. So I went back into my eczema journey and started out when I was a small child, like many of us with eczema, was diagnosed around 4 or 5 years old. And I had the eczema in the crooks of my arms, behind my knees, and just kind of managed it with moisturizers. My mom, was trying to take certain things out of my diet. She thought I was allergic to chocolate, which is so sad because it wasn't chocolate, and chocolate's one of my faves. So that was sad as a kid. But once I got
your mother, there's so many similarities in the book that resonated with me. I'm like, oh my gosh, it sounds so familiar. It's just like going down these rabbit holes and chasing, a food allergy or a grass or weeds or trees. It's just like this constant battle of trying to figure it out your whole entire life. So yeah.
And in junior high, wow, the thing that's the most important is what are people thinking of me and fitting in and all of that. So plus I was uncomfortable, but I think it was more about the way that I looked that drove me into finding some other solutions. So we went to a dermatologist. He did the skin prick test on me, found a couple of things I was sensitive to, but it wasn't anything off the charts. And they gave me topical steroids, and they worked like a charm. I mean, within a half hour, my skin felt better. It was looking better within a day or two. And so I was like, yay, I can eat whatever I want, do whatever I want. And I just went into the teenage lifestyle where it's like Twix and Diet Coke and pizza and all the stuff. And I just had my trusty tube of tridesolone cream, right, that I just put on if I needed it. Well, that's how I managed my skin for years and years and years. And when I came into my 30s, I got pregnant and noticed that my eczema was getting worse. So it was spreading to new areas of my body. It was just, it's popping up on my legs, my arms, and noticed as the years went by, my second pregnancy got even worse then, almost like big dime size hives. And I found, oh, it's when I'm eating all the fruit salad, trying to be healthy. I can't do strawberries and kiwis. I was noticing I was becoming sensitive to so many different foods. And I'd go to a restaurant and I'd have a hard time even picking something off the menu after a while, because it's like, oh, not that, not that, not that. Not only did I start developing a ton of food sensitivities, but I started to react in my skin a lot. So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I know that like the one thing doctors talk about topical steroids is it thins your skin. So I'm thinking, well, maybe my skin is getting thinner and things are getting into my bloodstream and I'm becoming sensitive to them. This is what I'm thinking. I didn't know anything about IgEs or, how it's actually dysregulating our immune system on top of thinning our skin. I didn't know any of that. But it was just something in the back of my mind. I was talking to my doctor about it and he said, no, it has nothing to do with topical steroids. And then even when I bring up triggers with that I'm eating, he's like, no, don't, try to figure it out. You're going to drive yourself crazy. You have a hereditary condition. You're going to be on topical steroids the rest of your life. Just accept that and just move on. It was very dismissive. I didn't feel like I was given time to talk through things, to try to work out all the complexities around this condition. It was like you just were given a very pat answer. And I felt like, well, this is all they have to give. I guess this is my path. Well, there were these growing questions inside of me. And one of the things that happened, I talk about in my book, is I went to Costco and there was a new pharmacist technician on duty. And I was going to pick up my topical steroid cream. And she looked at me, she's like, hey, this is a really high potency, and I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, how long have you been using this? And I'm calculating in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, I've been on these for about 26 years, not that specific one, but that specific one, probably a good, 10 years. And just for 1 second, her eyes popped. Like she didn't say anything. See this look that went across her face and it freaked me out. I had like this in the pit of my stomach. I'm like, oh my gosh, what do you know that I don't know? And she went on to say, you have to be careful about using these drugs. And it was just adding to all of these unanswered questions that I had in my head. And I thought, I'm going to start looking into this myself. So I started looking into research around topical steroids and eczema and found, yes, it is correlated with a heightened like allergic response. And I found a study in Canada that talked about using a better barrier cream could lessen your use of topical steroids by 40%. So I'm like, awesome. I'll start using like mango butter or shea butter and things like that. And I'll just not use the steroids and then my body will get back to normal. So I started doing that and I was testing all of these different products. I got this book about skincare that I talk about in my book too. It rocked my world. When I read that book, I was just like, what? I had never thought about the things I was putting on my body before that. Like all I cared about, does it smell good? Does it make my hair shiny, right? Does it make my skin look good? I never thought about what was in the product. And I'm reading in this book, 60 to 100% of what we put on our skin goes into our bloodstream. I was like, what? And then I'm finding there are so many of these chemicals that have never even been tested. I'm like, wow, this is, kind of blowing my mind. And so I'm just going to change my lifestyle, use better products around my house, yada, yada. So I'm weaning myself off steroids in the meantime. And I'm using less and less of them. And I'm having like things on my legs, like I'm having a reaction on my legs. And I think, oh, it's just probably too much beeswax, in my formulation. So I'm doing all of these changes. And the last place I'm using the steroids is on my fingers, which is where I always had the most problems because everything you're touching, it's making cracks in my hand. So I use topical steroids a lot and even put Band-Aids around them just to try to get it to heal enough, which I didn't realize I was exacerbating and thinning my skin more, creating more and more like problems with cracking and whatever. So sad, but I didn't know.
Right.
So I'm using it on my fingers. And when I finally stopped on those, within a day or two, like I'm trying to remember, I'm pretty sure it was 1 day, which is kind of mind blowing to me because I never used a lot of steroids, but I would just be using them on different parts of me, which I came to find out later, your body doesn't necessarily care where it's going on. It's a hormone, you're getting it, right? It's like your body is, and I hate to use that word because it's kind of triggering for people, but you're dependent on it, right? Your body is used to getting this certain thing and not having to produce it anymore. So when I stopped completely, I found out that my specific drug was 1,800 times the strength of my natural cortisol. So can you imagine, it didn't take much to give it what it needed to stay in this certain homeostasis, right? Like I thought I was pretty healthy. I juice fast, I exercise, I had a pretty healthy lifestyle. I had no idea what those steroids were doing to me internally until I stopped. And so within one day, my skin starts burning, and that bone deep itch that all of us in TSW understand, we don't even have to describe it, you just know it. My skin starts burning and itching, and I'm laying on the couch. I couldn't go to bed. I mean, I'm laying there by my husband, itching, scratching. So I just went to lay on the couch, and it got worse and worse over the night. And so bad that I was breathing like I was in childbirth. I mean, it was that bad. I'm like, I can't believe it happened that quickly for me, because for some, it'll be a week or 2 or 3. Me, it was pretty immediate. So I'm looking around on Google, a lot of us too, trying to figure out what in the world is going on. And I find ITSAN, and I'm reading, what are the signs of dependence? What are the signs, like the symptoms of withdrawal? And this realization is like dawning on me. And one hand, I'm so relieved. It's like, I finally have answers to all of these questions. On the other hand, I was horrified, because I'm reading these stories of what people are going through. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my face is going to swell up. I'm going to look like that. I have to go through all this pain and suffering and go through hell and back, what Dr. Rappaport talked about. But honestly, at the time, and a lot of us I know feel this way, I thought, oh, it'll be a couple weeks for me, maybe 3 months tops, because I'm a healthy person and I've been weaning myself off. So I'm not going to be like one of those cold turkey people.
Well, I have a feeling that it's really going to resonate with people who may not know that they are, experiencing TSW, because I know we went through the same exact thing. So it may sound very familiar, because you're searching and searching and you think that your eczema is getting worse. But in reality, it is due to the drugs, due to the steroid. So I'm sure it sounds familiar. And even the piece about, in your doctor's office and feeling just, misunderstood or not heard. So I think that, a lot of people can relate to that.
So, and that's one of the reasons why I really built out the eczema section, is because I want people to have all the information that I wish I had. I gathered all of that when I was, a lot of it while I was still sick in bed. I was bedridden 1.5 years. I did a ton of research on what we know about things like the microbiome and the filaggrin and EPA and GLA and all of these different things that are contributing to what's happening in the skin. So I really put a lot of research in there. There's over 130 citations in this book. But then I also went through caring for a child with eczema. What are the basics around eczema care? From basic wound treatment to taking care of infections, and how, like wet wrap therapy and all of these different things to care for your skin. I talk about the science, and then I talk about treatments, and just try to give every single option for people so that they can make an informed decision about what's right for them. Right. Because we're all different. Even with eczema, they're still identifying new types all the time. And new driving factors. So even drugs, what drug will work for you will not work for you. Well, for another is what I mean. So we're all different, which means we need to have all the different options to be able to make an informed decision about our care and figure that out with our doctors.
Right. And I really appreciated that part of the book. I mean, I was taking notes. So it's always good to know this information, especially, again, for people who are going through it in the beginning. So I appreciate that part of the book, where I think it'll be really helpful for people to see it all in one place. It's just very nice and concise and well organized. Love it. So you started studying all of this, and you found yourself in the midst of realizing that what you were going through was topical steroid withdrawal. And it happened very fast and furious for you. Can you just summarize, the next few months? I know that I wrote down some quotes from the book, talking about you were going through some intense physical changes, but major, mental growth and personal growth. You were living from hour to hour. It wasn't like day to day, it was hour to hour. So you really took us into what you were feeling at the time, and the pain and the changes you were going through in your life and your loss. I'm so sorry you went through that. I'm so glad you're here to tell us about it and you came out the other side. Can you just tell us about those first few months and what it was like?
Sure. I was oblivious in the beginning. And I know I write about what the burden, even the mental burden of TSW is, and how it grows over time. You feel at the beginning of the journey really strong. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be better than I ever was. You know, you're just full of life and full of strength. And then you suffer for so long. It's almost like that in itself is a lot to carry on top of the physical stuff, right? So I had all these milestones for myself and these timelines, and I finally had to throw them all out, because when you get there and you're not better yet, the more times like that you hit, the more and more discouraged you can become. You have to kind of just get rid of that and realize I'm getting better, like period. Like I know that I'm getting better. But my first 3 months, honestly, I wasn't even the worst of it yet. So I was getting worse over time. So first my skin is really bad, but I'm still able to function, bring my kids around and do stuff. And then blood started pooling in my legs so much that I couldn't stand for more than 15 minutes at a time. It just was really painful, on top of these itch attacks that would come, and everybody knows what those mean. I describe them in the book pretty detailed, because I want everyone to understand who hasn't experienced this, that this is not eczema. This is something very, very, very different, and something much more horrific than a chronic condition. And I'm not downplaying severe eczema at all, but it's just, this is something different. So it just kept amping up in different ways, where I wasn't able to sleep. I became less and less mobile because my entire body was affected. So I couldn't even turn my neck anymore. Everything burned so bad. It's sort of like if someone poured a kettle of boiling water over you, that kind of a burn, that every tiny little movement you make really, really hurts. That's how it was. So I got to the point where I was bedridden. I would plan my trips to the bathroom or anything else, like to get food, because it just wasn't worth it to me to just get up and go as I could. I planned that. I would plan even if it was an effort to even reach for the remote control to watch TV, because it hurt so much. So it just continued to get worse. I discovered that bathing helped a lot. So I spent my time between my bed for about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and then go in the bathtub for about 2 hours. And my days and nights were the same. It was like 24 hours. It was every 2 hours, switching around, just to be able to survive. My body started oozing everywhere, and I was sticking to the sheets, and disgusting. I mean, I'm a very kind of a weak stomached person. And it's funny that I went through something like this, because it just took that to another level, where I had to live with myself, like smelling like a rotting corpse, and, watching my skin fall off and my hair fall out. And yeah, it was just horrific. I felt like a monster. And I had to completely withdraw from my social life, really even my family, because I couldn't hang out. I was in my bed. They'd come in and spend time with me. Sometimes my little one especially would stay next to me and would take a nap next to me, which meant a lot, because wow, it's lonely. It is lonely. But it's hard on the family, because, they have to sit and watch their mom my whole life was about my kids at the time, and you're constantly giving. And it's just such a change in roles. And you were talking about like the mind shift that has to happen in that time. I had to give myself permission to heal. And I realized I can't be the mom I want to be, or the wife I want to be, or the friend I want to be, if I don't get better. So I have to let go of some of this stuff and just trust that those relationships will be what they're supposed to be. And they'll be there when I'm on the other side of this. And even if not, it's like, I didn't know what else to do. It's like, I didn't have any other options at the time. I mean, now there are some different things that people are trying and doing, but back then in 2012, it was like time, period, right? Or like a methotrexate or a very, very strong immunosuppressant. And I felt like, man, if this is how my body responded to steroids, no, I don't feel like that's the best option for me. In fact, I decided to do no synthetic drugs, with even ibuprofen, nothing, because I didn't want to put any more stress on my liver or anything else that was just really, really struggling. I lost probably, 30 pounds from where I am right now. So I was like skin and bones. Just wow, my family was really worried about me. Those are my first few months. And like I was saying in the book too in the beginning, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual was also interconnected. And like the healing that was happening on the outside was really, really, I don't know, it was intense. But so was what was happening inside. And it took me to places, yeah, that I can't even really put into words. A lot of it is in the book,
Yeah.
but many times the emotional stuff that I had to work through was just as difficult as, and sometimes even more difficult than the physical pain and the suffering. But yes, I would have to live hour to hour sometimes. I remember thinking that, don't even think about tomorrow, Kelly. Just make it through to the next hour. Like, especially when those itching episodes would happen. And I remember being in the bathtub one time and I had these scratcher things and I was just like going crazy on my body. And I wouldn't lose it often because I didn't want my kids to ever hear me. I didn't want them, yeah, it was hard. Anyway.
It's amazing that we are both brought to tears during this because it is just always fresh. I don't think it really is. I mean, I'm coming from a caregiver perspective and reading your words, I don't want to lose it too, but reading your words helped me understand, I was living through this with my own daughter. So reading your words helped me understand specifically what she was going through that she couldn't explain to me, so it kind of just opened that back up. And so for any parents out there, for anyone who is in the midst of going through this, you just have to understand that you're not alone. So
yeah. And I wanted to, one of the hardest things about writing this piece of it around topical steroid withdrawal is because it's so horrific. Like the symptoms are really bad, but then the longevity of it and just the unrelenting nature of it is just like the monotony of it just goes on and on, the same thing over and over and over. It's like, I mean, you could say that for infinity, right? It's like, okay, stop. But your brain can only take so much, right? When bad thing after bad thing after bad thing is like, okay, there's got to be like a reprieve or some happy times in here somewhere. TSW is not like that. And I remember, I don't even think I put this in my book, but it was, maybe I did. It was 6 months or so before I even felt one pleasant sensation in my body. Could you imagine?
I do remember reading that.
That long.
I think you said you moved your foot.
My toes or my feet. I felt my sheet against my foot. I'm like, oh, that feels nice. And then it hit me. I haven't felt a nice feeling in 6 months. And then not just that, but it's like, I haven't gone to a party or walked through a park and felt the wind and eating ice cream or, going to a movie. I haven't done that. I can't even remember the last time. I just laughed carefree.
Yeah.
Because all of it was just struggle. All of it was pain. All of it was just make it to the next day, try to hold your family together, try to, convince everybody that you're getting better. And it was just hard thing after hard thing. So this was difficult to write. I felt like I was slogging through quicksand many times. I tried to write this book in a way that it was easy reading, that it was conversational. It's a conversation that I would have with my best friend or my sister, telling them the things that are in my heart of hearts, like the very, very private things. It's not easy for me to do because I'm a very private person, but I realized how important this was to do, which brings us to the whole thing to Eczema with Love. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead with the title.
Oh, let's go.
One of my sisters actually had thought of that, and that is absolutely perfect. It's exactly what this should be, because this is my response. And not just my response, but I hope that it is our response, because it's coming at it from being on the other side. It's speaking to it.
Yeah.
You came into my life, you brought so much pain, you brought so much suffering, but here's where I am now, and I can speak to you with love. I'm speaking with love to this community because this is my act of loving you, of giving back, of giving you what I wish that I had had. That intimate conversation with someone who cares about you, who wants to see you healed and living the life you were meant to live. That's what this book is about. As there's a lot of hard, dark stuff in there, interwoven throughout it is a lot of light. Especially, there was a part of if you had gotten to the herpeticum piece and the hospital and how, wow, devastating that experience was. But when I look back on it, I cry because yes, it was horrible, but to remember how I was so surrounded then was almost like a sacred time for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, we can talk about that a little. What I found amazing about that was the doctors weren't diagnosing you. They were treating you with antibiotics. And you reached out to Joey, who was the president of ITSAN at the time, and you had heard about it being discussed on the Facebook groups. So it was just a profound moment for me because, a lot of people say that, sometimes the groups are bringing them down, but, a lot of times they're really, really holding you up. So I don't know, it was some kind of divine intervention that you had known about that, and it probably saved your life.
It probably saved my life because it got so bad. That virus it's deadly if it gets into your lungs and gets into your brain. And it was full body, it was systemic for me, and they could not get my fever under control. They were telling me, we're putting you on steroids because we're afraid we're going to lose you. And I was freaked out because I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't go back. But I'm so glad. Looking back at it now, and it's kind of like to eczema with love thing again. When I went through it, wow, was that dark? And afterward, the darkest time of my life, because I thought, number one, how did this ever happen? I had such a horrible experience in the hospital with my care, really, really bad. And I was absolutely powerless to help myself and to stand up for myself, it was awful. And then I just went into this dark space where I just didn't want to fight anymore. I just didn't have it in me anymore. I was really depressed. So my marriage started tanking, and I didn't even know, my relationship with God through this has helped me through, but I didn't even know what to think about that anymore, and faith, and just, how could a loving God allow something like this to happen? I just wanted to walk away from it all. But now seeing what happened through that and how many doors that has opened, that experience, when I go and talk to people who are in leadership positions who can actually make change, when I show those ugly pictures, those horrific medical journal type pictures, you just can't argue with that. And there's no discussion. It's just, it is what it is. I don't want to be known like that in the world. But the other part is, like, if people don't realize that this is what's happening, change is never going to come.
Right.
I recently read William Wilberforce's biography and was so encouraged by that story too, and the abolition of the slave trade. And what changed was public perception of what was happening. And they showed pictures of what was happening. And it's through things like that is where people, like, the light finally goes on and they think, we can't not do anything anymore. It's up to all of us to step up and do what we need to do to fix this and change this and protect one another. So like I was saying, yeah, these things that had happened, they were so horrific. Went through a really hard time knowing how to deal with that, knowing how to, like, reconcile it in my own mind. But now I see why. I see why it was allowed in my life, because it's bringing the change that's needed for millions and millions of people. And I'm okay with that. And I don't regret it for that reason, Yeah.
Thank you for being so vulnerable. I mean, I know you mentioned so many times, because we work together all the time, but I know you mentioned so many times, a lot of times when I feel like I'm in quicksand doing this work, you're always the one that's very uplifting, and there's something very special about you, Kelly, that's propelling us all forward. And I know that your advocacy work in this community is definitely one of the major reasons why we're being catapulted and we're being talked about in conferences, why doctors are mentioning TSW. So it's because of you. So thank you for that. So I'm saying thank you on behalf of the whole entire community.
It's my honor. It's honestly, I never would have imagined myself doing any work like this. The picture I had of my future was very, very different, Right. So, but I wouldn't ask for anything more than this, because it really is my heart's desire is to help people. In the book is my own discovery
Yeah.
And there's one quote in there by John Paul, where it talks about suffering being the weight around a diver's neck so that he can find the pearls. And that is so true for me in this time. And often I would feel like this wave of suffering coming on me, whether it be like another physical thing, or I'm scared about my relationship with, my husband, or just I'm scared about what's happening in my body. Like this big wave would be coming toward me. I feel like it's going to, I'm done this time, like I can't handle it this time. Sometimes it would feel like it's too late, almost like, where are you? I'm praying, where are you, God, in all this? And then something would come. It was like, I'd find that pearl every single time.
Yeah.
And I can see how all of this suffering has created in me something really rich, something that I can give to others, something that has made me live a life of meaning rather than just living for myself and my own happiness.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the next, or the last portion of the book, you talk a lot about it, your advocacy work, and the amazing changes that have been taking place in the TSW community. Can you tell us what's going on now that we need to know about, and what changes are coming, and what are the major changes that have happened since you were the president of ITSAN and now as on the executive board?
Sure. So I still remember when TSW was called an internet myth, and how whenever it was brought up, it was immediately shut down in many communities because it was purely seen as anecdotal and people misdiagnosing themselves. So we have come really far from even then, which is probably 2013, 14. So that's not that long ago. I mean, it feels like a long time ago. But in the book, I tell the story about how when I finally started getting a little bit better and the thought came to me about, filing a lawsuit. I think all of us have thought that at one point. And so if I was put in touch with a mutual friend and we sat down and I was telling her the situation, and she said, well, you're past the statute of limitation for filing a lawsuit because it has to be within a year, which I was like, what? How can people fight this when they're so sick like I was? And then she was talking about a class action, but that's probably not going to work because everybody's used so many different types of drugs over all this period of time. How can, prove one over the other, et cetera, et cetera. So she said, but I could get you a meeting with the FDA, and here's what you would have to do in order to get that. Because I had always thought about changes probably being one of the big things that need to happen. And I thought maybe even with a lawsuit would help bring that about. So she started laying out all these different pieces that are required in order to get a meeting like that and to get, change made on high levels. And at the end of that conversation, I was like, no, thank you. I've had enough of TSW in my life. I don't want this to be my life mission, right? I just want this to get over with and get on with my life. And so I walked away. And the crazy thing is that one by one, those things started to happen. And it wasn't just me. I don't take credit for where we are. I mean, there has been so much effort by so many people. And it's been like just this building that's been slowly growing. And so much of it has been unseen for a very, very long time. The people who came before me and ITSAN put so much blood, sweat, and tears into this cause and trying to move things forward. We burned through a lot of people because it just took so much effort to fight this uphill battle. And many of us are going through this still ourselves. So we're dealing with our own physical stuff, our own mental stuff, and then trying to fight a system to bring change. So it's just exhausting. It's discouraging. So everybody gave what they could, 110%, and we all kept building off of one another. So it was kind of like this snowball talk about effect where it's growing and growing. I honestly feel now that we have reached the top of the hill and it's starting to go over the other side and pick up momentum. All of this effort that has been pushing it forward, trying to raise awareness, trying to get legitimacy and connect with the right people and get some evidence and all of the things that are needed in order to bring change. It's all the thankless, all the behind the scenes stuff. A lot of times I know even with ITSAN, people are like, what's ITSAN doing? We are so limited, our capacity. Most of us have full-time jobs and families. And so we're giving everything that we have, of the rest of our time to do this. Most aren't unpaid and it's volunteer. So there is only so much we can do. But within that space, We're doing a lot undercover, so to speak, but much of it has to do with making connections with the medical community and the right people. So there are systems set up in place, and you have to, you can't just shout loud and things are going to change. You actually need to know who to talk to and what kind of information they need. You have a lot of setup up into that point. So that's been a lot of our work up into this point, but it does require each one of us to get involved. We all have a piece of the puzzle in our hands, whether that's talking to your friends and family at this point, if you're sick in bed, and just telling them, giving them information, whether that's going back to your doctor. And I know that takes a lot to get to the place where you feel like you have the confidence and the credibility and the information and the respect and all of those things to go back and have that conversation. But those conversations need to happen. Doctors need to see what's happening in their patients, and they need to see them getting better. But a lot of times, I think so many people, myself included, you're just so frustrated with how things turned out. It's like, I never want to see you again. Not after what you did to me. I don't trust you. So you go to another doctor. And then how is that doctor to know how he's practicing medicine is hurting people? How is he going to know? It's going to take a really long time for it to come up to the top and trickle down back to me. So it's up to us, whether it's writing a letter, whether it's going back in person, setting up a meeting with them to let their doctors know. There's things that we can do, obviously, on social media, right? We all have different gifts, strengths, talent. You have to just keep bringing that message back. And it's the same thing to decision makers and whoever else we're talking to. Squeaky wheel, right? We just have to keep on going back and having that conversation. We are not going anywhere. And
right,
so this is
right. And not everyone has to do the advocacy work that you're doing, or not everyone has to join the board of a nonprofit. I mean, sometimes it's all it takes is just advocating for yourself.
Yes.
At the doctor. So yeah, be that squeaky wheel. But every little bit, I truly believe every little bit helps.
Every little bit helps. Like I think of the documentary that Brianna did, the documentary that Cece did. Someone gets their story in a news article somewhere, like in the UK, there are a lot of those. Every single piece is adding up.
Just to wrap it up, Kelly, I just have to say that I was moved so many times reading the book from a caregiver's perspective. I feel like I wanted to just shout it from the rooftops and go into, the support groups and tell everyone, if you're feeling alone, if you're feeling like, you can't make it through this, read and listen to Kelly's story and understand what she's been through. So I found so much meaning in it. I think other people can too. What is your hope for the book? What do you hope that people get out of the book?
Honestly, that is one of my hopes, Natalie, is that people know that they're not alone and that there is hope and that there's a good ending to the story. Because a lot of times during TSW, even though you see those healed stories, you think, oh, maybe I'm the anomaly. Maybe I'm not going to get better because it takes so long. And when weeks turn into months, turn into years, you start to lose hope. So I want that to be the resounding theme. It is the resounding theme of that story is hope. And even though it's very dark, there's interwoven a lot of light because of the support that I had, because of what's ahead. I also warn the eczema community. I want to pull them in and let them know, here are all of your different options. Here's a different road that you can take that I wish I knew back in the day. I wish I could rewind 25 years. And the end is a call to action. It really is what I just said. What is in your hand? What piece do you have to play in all of this? And let's do it together.
That's amazing. That's perfect. And I think that's just such a stellar vision for the future. And it doesn't have to be about blaming, and we don't need to live in the past. Basically everyone coming together can make change.
Yes.
I don't think anyone truly believes that any doctors were meaning to harm anyone.
Oh.
So let's make that change and let's move forward and stop the suffering.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And let's work together.
Yeah.
We should be working together as a team. The way forward is being courageous enough to face those things that hurt us, that we were very angry at, but be able to channel all of that stuff in a way like, let's make progress and let's move forward, not just for ourselves, not just for me, but for the millions of people who are coming behind us. Let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for your words of encouragement. And I know it's going to help so many people. Where can they find your book? They can just go to Amazon and
Yep.
search for the title. They can search for you or the title.
Yes. Yep. It's on paperback right now and it's on Kindle.
All right, Kelly. Well, I will talk to you soon and thank you